This is Small Business Big World, our weekly podcast prepared by the team at Paper Trails. Owning and running a small business is hard. Each week, we'll dive into the challenges, headaches, trends, fun, and excitement of running a small business. After all, small businesses are the heartbeat of America, and our team is here to keep them beating. Welcome to Small Business Big World, our weekly podcast talking about all things small business. Today, my guest is Dawn Pahel. Dawn is our HR consultant here at Paper Trails. Thank you for joining me, Dawn.
Thanks, Chris.
Awesome. Well, so today's topic is HR 101, which is certainly kind of a boring topic for most small business owners, right? But that's why we have jobs, right?
That's exciting to us.
Yeah, I mean, that gets me up in the morning anyway. So before we dig into it, don't forget to like, follow, share, rate, review, subscribe, all those things. We are on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. Wherever you are consuming your content, we are probably there. John gets us out everywhere. If you have any questions about anything on the podcast or your questions for guests, you can always email us at podcast@papertrails.com and we'll get right back to you. So, Dawn, HR 101, right? I know that gets you really excited, but most small business owners don't think so.
No, it's a lot to think about when you start a small business.
So what are some of the, what's the first thing you think about when, a small business owner comes to you and says, I need help with HR? What's that first thing that you go back to them and say, all right, let's start with the basics. Where are you?
Okay, so the first thing that I say is let's talk about compliance and labor laws because they can be really complex depending on the size of your business and can get you in a lot of trouble if you don't comply.
And the government has been doing a very good job of changing the rules on us all, right? Over the last few years. So
yes, absolutely.
Adjusting and adapting. So, what are some of those labor laws? I know there's, overtime laws and child labor laws, and what are some of those different things?
So one of the things in the forefront right now is exempt versus non-exempt employees and how those are classified.
And exempt versus non-exempt for the layperson is salary versus hourly, right?
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
So, certainly I can, we know this, the government has come out, federal government has come out and said, we're going to raise the threshold, the salary threshold from, $30-something thousand to $58,000 annually. And that's a weekly test, not an annual test. So, make sure we're keeping track of that. And that certainly is affecting a lot of small business owners, right? I mean, they have to look at their wage structures.
Yes. It plays into budgeting purposes. So if you're budgeting thinking that you're going to pay someone a salary and then it ends up that you have to pay them hourly plus overtime, that can really dig into your budget.
Sure. And, why, that talks about overtime, of course. What other types of labor laws are out there that folks need to be aware of, especially if you're just starting out or, basics?
Youth employment is a big one. There are a lot of regulations around employing people under the age of 18 and students that are still in school. So it's a good idea to have a really good handle on those kind of things.
And there's the big thing about these labor laws is there are usually state labor laws and then there's federal labor laws. And sometimes the federal labor law is more strict and sometimes the state labor law is more strict, right?
Right. And trying to figure out that balance and find out what applies to you. And, if you have businesses that are in multi-states, it can vary depending on the state. So that can get pretty complex too.
Yeah. And really quickly, that's an HR basic thing too, is, labor laws and payroll and tax and all that stuff is driven by where your people are working, right?
Correct.
So most people are, most small businesses are fortunate. They may only have one location, one state to worry about. But certainly there are plenty of small businesses, us included now, that have remote employees all over the place, right?
Right. Well, it's important to remember that the laws where they're employed, the state that they're employed, those are the laws that are going to apply to them, not necessarily where the business is located.
Yeah. And, the other thing that, that kind of leads into labor law posters, right? I mean, we were having this conversation the other day. I'm updating our labor law posters here at the office because I have not been as compliant as we should be. And, the state and the federal government require that we put all these labor law posters up to let the employees know about their rights, right? And how does that work with, remote employees in different locations and all that stuff?
Right. So if you have remote employees that are not coming into a physical location, you need to provide those posters digitally, and you need to keep them up to date for each state that your employees work in.
Right. And they change often.
Very often.
And the state may come out. I mean, in Maine, they just came out with a brand new one, right? The veterans' rights one, I think, right? So.
Right. Yep. And so you've got to stay on top of making sure that those get posted either physically or digitally every time that they update a poster or include a new poster.
How should small businesses stay on top of keeping up with all these changes and new rules and regulations? And when the state makes a change or a new labor law poster, how do they stay on top of that?
They need to go to the Paper Trails website.
Well, we certainly do a good job with that, keeping those out there. And we send things out as they come up. But are there any resources out there, even we all get so many newsletters, but I don't know, is there anything that you know of that, can keep people on top of this?
The SHRM, the Society for Human Resources Management website, does a really good job of posting news bulletins daily and weekly on any of the labor law changes. The Department of Labor website and the state of Maine also do a good job.
Yeah. And I would also say, stick with your trade associations. They do a pretty good job of keeping an eye on changing regulations for your industry, right? If there's things that are coming up that are going to affect you.
Yes.
Most of those trade associations are pretty good too.
Very industry specific for you.
So let's move on from the labor law compliance, which of course is probably the bedrock of HR. But let's talk about hiring and how do small businesses, certainly we know small businesses are having a hard time finding talent, and maybe talent is the wrong word, I guess. There's finding bodies in some cases, right?
Right.
But certainly, how should folks go about finding talent and managing that and so forth?
So it's really important to have accurate job descriptions that outline the duties required for the position.
Why? Because we've got clients all the time say, I don't need a job description. Why do they need a job description?
So it's really important to have job descriptions that clearly define the roles and responsibilities so that people know what is expected of them.
Well, what they're coming to work for, right? Right. I mean, that's important. I mean, gosh, and certainly, every business might be unique. And if you look at, I guess a serving position is probably pretty consistent, but some restaurants may have a different structure or responsibilities than others in certain examples, right? So I think if you have something unique, it's important to have that.
Right. And I mean, to set employees up for success, they need to know what's expected of them and what their duties and responsibilities are on a day-to-day basis.
Sure. And that's the basics of setting the expectation, right? There's much more that goes into managing employees. But so once you get your job description, where do you go from there? How do you get people to come in the door, and how do you onto the floor to work?
So this is where a really good handbook that talks about your benefit plans or things specific to your organization that would be a benefit to the employee. Paid time off, holiday pay, health and dental and vision plans, and that sort of thing that might set you apart from your competition.
Right. So what else should employers be putting in their handbooks? Right. I mean, that's a pretty important thing that every employer should have. What else should go in there?
Definitely all of your company-specific policies need to be addressed in your handbook. That can get very extensive. So one of the ways that you can do that is you can address the policy and then have a separate freestanding policy that goes into more detail.
Yeah. And certainly, you and I have seen many different handbooks, from the bare bones to, wow, that's been way overdone.
Right. Yes, one extreme to the other.
Certainly, I think we both probably tend to agree that there's somewhere in the middle to keep things going. But I have seen clients with 200-page employee handbooks, and let's be real, what employee is actually going to look at that?
Yeah, the chance that an employee is going to read all 200 pages is very slim. So if you pare that down to about, I think 40 to 50 pages is a good happy medium.
Yeah, and we see, I always say we see clients that try to manage their people through their policy or manage their people through technology, and you still have to manage your people, folks. You can't be, you really just, you can't manage on paper.
No. It's definitely a human interaction.
What, once we get them in, we've told them, what we're doing, what their job is, what they're going to be getting for benefits, pay, all that fun stuff. How are you managing them and managing their performance and their growth and development?
So every organization should have a performance management / performance development plan for each of their employees so that, they can set goals and have a place to go from the starting point.
Right. Yeah, just growing, internally is really important. It's not, most employees don't want to just come in and be that basic, line worker forever. They want to be, moving up in the world, right?
Right. They definitely want to know what their path for growth is and, see how they can get there and how you can help them get there.
Right. Now, I think most small businesses probably don't have any sort of performance management or, employee review process. Why do you think that that's really important for small businesses in particular, right?
Well, with the competition in the job market right now, people need to know where they stand. They need to know that there is a path for growth and, what is going to be expected of them to get to that next level.
Right. And, I think most people think of a performance review as a negative connotation, right? They were like, oh, I'm going to get scolded or told how terrible of a job I am. But, we look at it as an opportunity for kind of a 360 evaluation. Okay, how do you think you're doing, right? And let's validate that, and where do you think you can, I think when you ask people that question, they're like, oh yeah, well, I'm really just not a great public speaker. I'm just not really great at coming on podcasts and doing this with Chris, right?
I don't know anything about that.
So, and then that's me challenging you to try something new, right? So,
Right.
I think that performance evaluations are certainly important because, like you said, it sets the baseline and the expectation of where the organization needs to go, where the individual needs to go, and just kind of aligns expectations.
Right. And one of the things that I always tell business owners is that there should never be any surprises on a performance evaluation. People should know what's coming at them.
Absolutely. And, by the time you have to go and work through some performance improvement plan, for example, same kind of thing, it shouldn't be a surprise. If you have to terminate someone, it shouldn't be a surprise, right? If you've been managing them correctly.
Right. They should know if they're being called into a meeting, they should know why they're coming into that meeting.
Right. Which that's a whole different conversation, terminations.
Yes. Yes.
Maybe we'll do a whole episode on that.
Yeah, I was going to say that's going to be a whole podcast all itself.
Oh, good. So, certainly, getting those performance evaluations and development plans in place is important, but what other types of training and development opportunities are you seeing that small businesses really should be thinking about?
Things that are specific to their industry are really important. I know, there are restaurant safety trainings and things like that have to be completed annually. There are also some state and federal trainings that need to be completed annually as well. Harassment training is something that the state of Maine requires for every employer to have a training for their employees annually.
Which, how many employees are actually doing that?
Not as many as I would like to see.
It's certainly, I think there's great goals, and there are some states that are much more rigorous in those requirements for training, right?
Right.
I think California is like one of those states where, gosh, they have the sexual harassment training police on the road every day. And because it's important, of course, but they're just, the employment culture is much different in certain states than it is here in the Northeast in general. So we are somewhat fortunate in the lack of enforcement, I would say, just unless there's, big issues there. The state of Maine anyway is really good at teaching rather than, smacking you with the ruler.
Right.
So.
Right. And, it's challenging, especially if you have a seasonal business, to get all of this fit in. But there are some ways that it can be done digitally that, a lot more time effective, and you can kind of get it knocked out for all of your employees pretty quickly.
Yeah, especially if you're a seasonal employer, you can come in and say, hey, we're going to be doing our opening meeting, right? We're going to have a half a day training. We're going to run through all these things. Here's all the new things this season. I think it's probably easier if you're a seasonal business anyway, just to say, gosh, we're going to do this one day mandatory training kind of thing for most of our staff for a couple of days or whatever.
Right, yeah. So, get everybody all at once.
What kind of documentation do, employee paperwork, other types of documentation do small businesses need to be keeping for their employees? I mean, that's a biggie that most people aren't great with either.
Right. No, employee files are a big thing. First and foremost, you need to have a accurate and complete I-9 form for every employee, which is filed separately than their employee file. It should not be filed in their employee file.
Why is that?
So you don't want to keep it in the employee file because there is some personal information that you wouldn't want to be shared with managers if they're pulling the employee file for other purposes. And also, too, if you do get chosen for an audit, it's really nice to be able to hand the auditor a binder that they can go through and they're not digging through individual employee files.
And that's one form, the I-9, that is, for whatever reason, it's very audited, right? The INS is out there, auditing these a lot.
Yes, very much. And there are some pretty big fines that go along with either not having an I-9 or not having it completed correctly.
Which is literally like the name on the wrong line. Like if there's a blank line, they'll gig you for that. There's lots and lots of things. I mean, they're very particular, right?
Yeah, I was just making a checklist for a client yesterday, and there is a 20 plus page booklet on how to complete a 1-page I-9 form.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. So, certainly we've seen the introduction of E-Verify, which helps your I-9 compliance, but doesn't replace the I-9 compliance, correct?
No, you still have to physically view each of the documents and record the information into the I-9 form so that you can then load it into E-Verify.
Right. So that's a tricky one for sure. What other documentation, do you think folks should have?
Complete employee files with applications, resumes, benefit forms, any kind of workers' comp paperwork or anything like that. That's another piece of documentation that you want to keep separately, is anything with any sort of medical information, any kind of drug testing or pre-employment physicals. All of those need to be kept in a separate file away from the main employee file.
So we have 3 employee files now.
Correct.
Per employee.
Correct.
Sounds like a great time.
Yes. Yes.
What about the tax forms? What about, those have to be in there too?
Yeah,
right?
you need to have a completed W-4 form for federal, and then as applicable for each state. So, Maine has a state tax, so you would need a Maine W-4 for any Maine employees that you have.
Those are the basics, right? We've gone through a lot of the different basics, labor laws, hiring, terminating, developing, paying, all that kind of stuff, policies. Let's think a little more strategically, right? I mean, I've got 10 minutes to stop and think about where I want to take my organization. What's kind of the HR strategy piece that small business can think about in terms of developing their organization?
So always, performance development for employees, and then, succession planning. You probably are not going to run your business for the next 50 years, but you might like to see it carry on. So you need to think about, when you step away, or if you have key employees stepping away, who's going to step into that role and take over?
Right. And that's a little bit of the development, right? You've got, as you're developing folks, you can plan for, replacements of key employees and things like that.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I mean, if your management team is, a couple of people, you might say, hey, I have this really strong, junior person that could step into that role or something, right?
Right. And, people also, too, sometimes need to be away from work for extended periods, FMLA or, personal leaves of absence. You need someone to be able to step in and fill that role while they're out as well.
All right, I'm going to put you on the spot now. You ready?
I don't do well with on the spot.
I know, and Graham can give us a break if we need to. But what is your biggest HR 101 horror story you've walked into and seen?
0 employee files, 0 I-9s, no documented pay records. It was really kind of a free-for-all.
Well, there we go. So keep yourself organized. That's the first thing. And certainly, here at Paper Trails, we're happy to assist our clients with these types of things. This is what Dawn's here for, is to help build that. And we have a lot of resources on our blog and on our website at papertrails.com with some HR 101, HR compliance guides, things like that we provide just to anybody that wants them, quite frankly.
Yes.
And then, if you need help with that afterwards, please feel free and come to, get in touch with us. So, well, good. Well, that was HR 101. Does it feel like we completed successfully? We get an A+?
I think we get an A+.
All right. Well, good. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us in this week's episode. HR 101. Dawn Pahel was our guest. Certainly, you can reach out to us at podcast@papertrails.com if you have any questions about this episode or any other episode that we've done. Don't forget, like, follow, share, rate, review. We are everywhere you want us to be, I think. So keep an eye out there for all the fun stuff. And otherwise, we will see you next week. Thanks very much. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Small Business, Big World. This podcast is a production of Paper Trails. We are a payroll and HR company based in Kennebunk, Maine, and we serve small and mid-sized businesses across New England and the country. If you found this podcast helpful, don't forget to follow us at @PaperTrailsPayroll across all social media platforms, and check us out at papertrails.com for more information. As a reminder, the views, opinions, and thoughts expressed are the hosts and guests alone. The material presented in this podcast is for general information purposes only and should not be considered legal or financial advice. By inviting this guest to our podcast, Paper Trails does not imply endorsement of or opposition to any specific individual, organization, product, or service.